On the agenda tonight, we're going back to 1975. We're going to be taking a look at Jimmy Ruffin, and he's going to be performing What Becomes of the Broken Hearted. Hello, Phil here from Wings of Pegasus, and welcome to another analysis video. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe. So, this video follows on from Monday's analysis video that I did on Joan Osborne with the Funk Brothers performing this very song. So, we're going to be putting the spotlight on Jimmy tonight with his version of it, the first released version back in 1966. This performance is from 1975, like I mentioned in the intro, but let's get Jimmy up on screen and see how he gets on.
Our world still with love is a wonderful sight. Being in love is everyone's heart's delight. But that look of love isn't on my face. That enchanted feeling has been replaced. As I walk this land of broken dreams, I have visions of so many things. But happiness is just an illusion, filled with sadness and confusion. What becomes of the broken hearted? You had a sweet love that's now departed. I know I've got to find some kind of peace of mind. Maybe, oh yeah. The roots of love grow all around, but for me they come tumbling down. Every day heartaches seem to grow a little stronger. I can't stand this pain much longer. I walk in shadows, searching for light. Cold and alone, no comfort inside. Hoping and praying, and I need someone to care. Always moving and going nowhere. What becomes of the broken hearted? You had a sweet love that's now departed. I've got to find some kind of peace of mind. Help me, please. I'm searching though I don't succeed for someone's love that's such a growing need. All is lost, there's no place for beginning. All that's left is an unhappy ending. What becomes of the broken hearted? You had a sweet love that's now departed. I know I've got to find some kind of peace of mind. I'll be searching everywhere just to find someone to care. I'll be looking every day. I know I'm gonna find a way. Nothing's gonna stop me now. I'll find a way somehow. I need you, baby. Girl, so bad I need you, darling. Need you. So bad, darling, I need you. Come on, baby, come on home. Need you right now, need you, baby, I need you, darling. Yeah, yeah.
And there we have it. As you would have noticed with this performance, we have got a more up-tempo version of the song, and if you want to have a chord breakdown, go back to that video that I did on Monday, because I do get the guitar out and take you through the chords that are being used. But talking about Jimmy and his vocal delivery, this does have that talked intro on it that I did mention in that previous video that was muted for the release of the record. So it's why the intro goes on for quite long, because he was talking in the studio, but it wasn't released. So Jimmy, when he performs it live, puts on that talked intro, and it is amazing how smoothly he transitions into that singing voice from the vocal bang on pitch. Another thing to mention, as well as this being a faster tempo than that original, is it's also in a different key, because we're about a tone lower here. The reason that I say about is that it depends where you listen to that original, because I have heard it in B, and I'm talking about where the verse starts here, in B and also B flat, and between tunings if you are trying to play along on your guitar and you find a version that's not in B flat or B but between. It's just something that tended to happen when the tape version of the song got converted to digital. And if the tape was running a little bit fast, then it's going to be slightly higher in pitch, and exactly the opposite if it was running slowly. So you get that slight decrease in pitch. And I'm sure everybody who plays guitar has been through this when you're listening to a song and it's between tunings. It is a little bit annoying because then you have to totally retune your guitar to be between tunings in order to play along. So if we are referencing that original track being in B flat, this will be in A flat. So like I said, a tone lower, 2 frets on your guitars, which means that the vocal is going to be ranging from around G3 all the way to our top note, which will be an F4. And the way that Jimmy delivers this is so easy to listen to, and it does have that storytelling quality to it because of the range that he just sings in the whole time. It's never going to be really pushed and forced, so that F that he does hit, that F4, is so consistent the whole time. And it might have been the case that they've intentionally lowered it for a live performance to be slightly easier on the vocals. I'm sure that Jimmy was performing this song a hell of a lot in the 60s and the 70s. So keeping that voice in trim and keeping a nice consistent vocal is what it's all about. The interesting thing about Jimmy's vocal as well is the way that he applies his vibrato, because throughout some of the more talked sections, obviously, he's hitting the pitches right between the eyes here, but the way that he delivers it is like he is talking and delaying the phrasing as well, being very freeform with the vocal delivery phrasing-wise, but having this vibrato that sometimes runs all the way through the vocal phrases, and then sometimes he'll sing a straight note and just apply the vibrato at the end. So he mixes it up the whole time. It has got such an approachable sound to it. And when I say that, I mean that pop music, mainstream, rhythm and blues as well, a lot had that slower vibrato, but it was subtle. Just to try and demonstrate what I'm on about with this vibrato that Jimmy has, in the first verse, when he sings so many things, it's a little wobble that you can hear, the so many things. And the subtlety of that wobble, if I was doing a wider vibrato and went so many things, it's like if you imagine that the vibrato was a pin and it was indicating the pitch that you're covering with your vibrato, going so, it'll be a really dramatic change from the range that we're covering pitch-wise, whereas going so many things, it's just a tiny little wobble that's in there, and it also isn't the opposite of that, which will be so many things, which is like a machine gun that's just firing off. So having that middle ground of between and is a nice it's so subtle, but when you're listening to somebody sing like Jimmy, who has that tone as well, when you roll that into one, that's what makes it so easy to listen to, because the vibrato is spot on, it's not offensive, it sits exactly where it needs to be easy to listen to. This is something that a lot of top R&B and soul singers have to their voice, a hint of rasp in their lower register. And it is something that when singers start to push their chest voice higher up in their range and are sometimes reaching for notes, you get that rasp sound in there because it is almost like a straining sound, even though some singers can make that sound safely. When you add a hint of that rasp in the lower register, it makes it so expressive, and that's exactly what Jimmy's got. Another thing to listen out for is that arrangement that's going on in the background. If you're just listening to the strings, for example, hear the amount of melodic content we've got in there, the way that they dance around throughout the whole composition, but then also we have the horn section that jumps in and out. it is such a journey, considering as well, this performance only 3 minutes in length. It isn't a long song by any stretch of the imagination, but there is so much going on with the key change that I put under the spotlight in the other video. Having so much within such a short period means that you have to go back and listen to it all over again, because the first time through, of course, you're going to be listening to Jimmy's voice, the quality of it, and you're probably going to be listening to that for a good while. But then once you start to dig into that backing as well, you can really get an appreciation of the composition as a whole and the amount that has gone into putting this together in the studio. Another thing to mention is that as well as the Funk Brothers getting this down in the studio, there were also backing vocals supplied by the originals and the Andantes. So there was top talent involved in every single department of this song. And it is one of those songs that Jimmy, once he heard it, it hadn't been recorded by anybody yet. In fact, it was intended for the Spinners to record, but Jimmy heard it and it hit a chord with him, and he said to the label at the time, I've got to be able to record this. He actually approached these songwriters, which were William Weatherspoon, Paul Reiser and James Dean, and he convinced them that he was the guy to record this song. Interestingly, Diana Ross and the Supremes recorded their version of the song in 1966, the same year that Jimmy released his. But when Jimmy released his version of the song, it was a massive hit. It went to number 7 in the USA, went to number 6 in the R&B charts, and went to number 8 in the UK charts. So it was a worldwide hit, which meant that Motown probably thought, Jimmy's version has been so successful, it wouldn't really make much sense to instantly release the same year another version of the same song. So they held off on it until 1969 and released that with the Let the Sun Shine In album. I do want to get briefly into Jimmy's history. He was the older brother of David Ruffin from The Temptations. He was just under 5 years older than David, but when they were young, they would sing in a gospel group, and it wasn't until 1961, when Jimmy was 25, that he started singing for Motown Records, and this was really session work. And he did record himself, but it was under Miracle Records, which was owned by Motown at the time. But then he got drafted in for national service, so had to leave that. But then in 1964, after leaving the army, he then returned to Motown. It was at this point that they were looking for somebody to replace Elbridge Bryant in The Temptations, and they offered Jimmy the place, but they also then heard his brother David sing, and they eventually offered the place to David, and Jimmy went back to his recording that he was doing before, but unfortunately he didn't have a lot of success. It was at that point, being in and around the studio, that he heard this song, and everything unfolded, as I mentioned earlier. It was released on his first album, Jimmy Ruffin Sings Top 10, as it was called in the USA. Here it was called The Jimmy Ruffin Way. And in 1966, when it was released, it got to number 8 here in the UK. But this performance that we're looking at is due to the fact that it was re-released in 1974, the year before this performance, and got up to number 4, so it charted even higher on that second release. So after releasing this song as a single and having massive success, he released further singles that were also popular, including Gonna Give Her All the Love I've Got, and in 1969 is when he released the album Rough and Ready, and that included Don't You Miss Me a Little Bit Baby, which got to number 68 in the charts and number 27 in the R&B charts. So towards the end of the 60s, unfortunately, Jimmy's popularity was on a bit of a decline, mostly due to the fact that other Motown artists were recording versions of the songs that he had already recorded, but they got a lot more publicity and exposure, so the public saw just those versions of the song and not the version that Jimmy had done previously. So in 1970, he recorded an album with his brother David, and that was called I Am My Brother's Keeper, and he also released The Groove Governor in 1970 as well as one of his own albums. The other thing is that Jimmy was hugely successful in the UK because he concentrated on the UK with that decline in popularity that he experienced, and he would go on to have 4 top 10 hits in the UK charts, and he did sing for Polydor Records, Chess Records, and during that time he released Tell Me What You Want. 1980 is when he released his album called Sunrise, and that was produced by Robin Gibb from the Bee Gees, and they had a massive hit on that album called Hold On To My Love. It got to number 7 here in the UK and number 10 in the USA. During this time in the 1980s, he did actually move to the UK, and he also collaborated with Paul Weller on Soul Deep. He became an anti-drug advocate after the death of his brother in 1991. And getting things more up to date in 2012, there was a compilation album that was released, and that was called There Will Never Be Another You. And sadly, Jimmy did pass away in 2014 after he was reported as being gravely ill. He was taken into hospital and moved into intensive care. But sadly, after 4 weeks, he did pass away at the age of 78. But it's great to have a look back at Jimmy in full flow here with that classic tone to his voice, the control, but also one of those songs that just announced him on the world stage being a monster hit everywhere. But thank you guys so much for suggesting this video for me to take a look at, and keep those suggestions coming in the comments below. Let me know what you guys think, and if you did enjoy this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe, and I'll see you guys at the next one. Rock!